Unfortunately, Vivian was unable to make it to this presentation due to her lack of availability, so I will be presenting this on my own. So our presentation was Music in Mind, examining the relationship between music listening behaviors and self-reported mental health. The background is that music therapy is used to improve mood, mental well-being, and in respect to reducing stress, especially. And it can be done through listening and interacting with music, which can reduce anxiety and depression levels, according to the Cleveland Clinic, and also improve mood based off of prior research. We were interested in how music therapy can be applied to improve one's mental health. This led us to our research questions, which was, what is the association between different music listening behaviors and mental health conditions? But we also wanted to investigate what are some influential factors that contribute to this association. The data that we used was from Kaggle.com, and it was called Music and Mental Health Survey Results, collected by Catherine Ruskaitis from the University of Washington, and is made up of online survey form responses posted on various public platforms. The data consists of 736 rows and 33 columns, and it has 3 quantitative variables and 30 categorical variables within the dataset. And the response we will be using in the study, called music effects, is categorical, representing whether and how a respondent's mental health has changed after listening to music. So improve, no effect, or worsen. For the data cleaning and methods, we first selected certain columns by removing the 2 unnecessary columns of timestamp and permission, as timestamp records the time when each individual submits a survey, and permission refers to whether the individual gives consent, and these are irrelevant as they do not represent actual questions in the survey. We also have to deal with missingness in the data set, as there were 17 missing values from 7 different columns, which is 2% of the observations, so we directly removed them. But we also used regression imputation for the BPM variable, as there were 107 missing values, which is over 10% of the original data. And we also removed outliers, such as the outlier 1E plus 9 BPM and 624, which is impossible. And there were 716 observations and 31 variables in the cleaned data set that we used. There was also the response variable, improve, no effect, or worsen, which was imbalanced. And to offset those, we combined no effect and worsen together and called it no improvement. So we compare improvement versus lack of improvement. We finally partitioned the clean dataset into the train and test dataset to perform cross-validation on our models. The train set has 70% of the data, or 501 observations, and the test dataset has 215 observations. So we can see here the difference between improve, no effect, and worsen versus improve and no improvement. So we use 3 different types of models: classification tree, card, and ensemble methods, binary logistic regressions, and support vector machines. Through the classification trees, the CART method and random forest had the lowest misclassification rates. Our initial tree had 8 terminal nodes and had a misclassification rate of 0.312, and we used misclassification rate for performance, as we do not have preference over the response variable, and we wanted to see how accurate the model could predict the test set correctly. When pruning the tree, the optimal model was one with 1 node, which means that none of the predictors were used, so that didn't really make sense, so we tried using ensemble methods as a result. So here we can see the misclassification rate on the test data for the initial tree model, bagging, and random forest, where we fitted the bagging and random forest models, and the misclassification rates on the test data set did not differ that much from the initial tree. Bagging produced around 0.316, and random forest the same as the initial tree. And here we can see that in the classification tree model, the long tree being aggregated might not outperform the short one, since the individual tree from the ensemble method was not pruned. So the performance of the tree algorithm was overly poor, so we may not consider this. We also saw the relative importance of the variables used in the random forest model, as the tree model is interpretable. Here we can see that the random forest suggests that BPM and age seem to have the most relative importance. We then decided to move into using the generalized logistic model, and we used assumptions that the independence assumption and that outlying observations were removed through using refitting. We assume the independence assumption as each respondent is unlikely to influence other responses due to the format of the data. We can see using the sensitivity specificity plots to assess model performance to see the discriminating thresholds, comparing the AIC and the BIC logistic models as well. And from the AUC measures, the area under the curve for each ROC curve, we found that based on the area under the curve, the AIC model has a higher AUC measure and therefore outperforms the BIC model. And we also use support vector machines and support vector classifiers for modeling, in which the optimum cost parameter was 0.5, and we got a misclassification rate identical to the tree algorithm. And when we compare the three different approaches of modeling SVC, polynomial SVM, and radial SVM, we can see that the BIC model was outperforming the others, and as it had a misclassification rate of 0.298. And we can see here the misclassification rate for SVC, polynomial SVM, and radial SVM. Despite SVC and radial SVM having similar performances, we prefer the SVC model as it was more parsimonious. Here we can see a model comparison for the misclassification rate on test for the CART random forest 0.3116, AIC logistic, and SVC. Overall, from our conclusions, based off of the misclassification rates from the SVC model, there was no misclassification, the AUC was equal to 1, and it was most parsimonious. The most important variables, according to the AIC, which were significant at 0.001 level, were whether listening to music were working, which had a coefficient of negative 0.925, and the level of anxiety with a coefficient of negative 0.155 were the most important variables based off of the AIC model. And the most important variables, according to Random Forest, were BPM, which is a mean decrease in Gini of 15, and age, with a mean decrease in Gini of 14. So we can identify the most important variables relating music and the association between mental health conditions as well. However, there were some limitations as there was a slightly imbalanced response variable, and there was a poor performance of tree methods as it limited model visualization and the variable identification of the importance, as well as a high level of subjectivity in the survey responses. As the survey involved self-identifying mental health status from like 1 to 10 ratings, the issue is that this is very subjective depending on how the person perceived their mental health to be. As well as there's possible volunteer bias, which limited the representativeness of the general population, as the data was described to be posted on like online social media platforms and forums. People who are interested in mental health or people who are interested in listening to music might be more likely to respond in this survey. So there could be an issue with bias within the data set. So there are also some future considerations that we would plan on working on, such as considering methods for managing imbalanced data to reduce the imbalance between the variables, such as choosing other evaluation metrics or using resampling methods. As well as to address the issue of subjectivity, we could implement an index that provides a standardized scale for valuing mental health. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know.